17's clapper board. You're about to hear an original HFY Sci-Fi tale titled, "You can choose any woman you want, human," she said. When I answered, "I want you." Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now, we begin. The first alarm was not a sound, but a color. The bridge lights of the human destroyer Akron shifted from a calm glacier blue to a violent orange that stained everything like a low sunset at the end of the world. Then came the sound, a deep, metal-boned groan as the hull flexed under a pressure it was never meant to endure. Captain Elias Ward steadied himself with one hand on the railing and another braced against the tactical table. A second later, the viewport filled with fire. The colony below, Lysara IV, should have been a green jewel twined with rivers and orchards. Now it was a bruise of smoke, a planetary wound that bled light along its seams. "Shields?" Elias asked, though he already knew. "Lieutenant HSU gone. Con officer gone." The crew stations were wrecked by shrapnel and heat, chairs empty or twisted or occupied by figures now perfectly still, faces that were less faces and more masks of ash. "Shields are." He swallowed the useless sentence and dragged breath through lungs that tasted like electrical storms. Outside the viewport, a Dominion dreadnought drifted like a polished blade. No running lights, no windows, just a reflective skin of mirror-black armor that caught the burning planet below and flung it back like an accusation. He became aware of the ringing in his ears, of a hot trickle running from his scalp, of a tremor that began in the bones and worked outward. He kept his voice steady with an act of will. "Emergency power to life support, manual if you have to." Nobody moved. There was nobody left to move. The Akron's AI, scrambled by EMP, offered a glitched whisper from somewhere deep in the systems. "Breach, breach, hull casualties." It was an echo from a drowning throat. Elias staggered forward. He passed a photograph half melted into the bulkhead, a smiling woman with dirt on her hands, hair stuck to her forehead, eyes squinting in Lysara's son Clara. He had taken that picture after she planted the first salt-tolerant wheat by the river named for her grandmother. Now the river was steam and the fields were glass. "You did this," he said, to the empty bridge or to the Dominion dreadnought or to the universe. He wasn't sure. When the hatch hissed, he expected vacuum. Instead, a breath of air rolled in, cool and faintly metallic, carrying a scent he had learned to associate with his enemy: ozone and winter stone. The figure that stepped through the smoke moved like a blade being unsheathed. She was tall and slim and quiet, her armor a seamless second skin with lines that matched the elegant economy of a hunting animal. Her crest was a subtle arc of bioluminescent tissue along the crown of her skull, pulsing like the heartbeat of a quiet sea creature. Her eyes were black. Not black like ink, but black like pools that reflected a night sky. "Captain Elias Ward," she said. The translator embedded in her throat gave the words a soft echo, as if she were speaking in a cathedral. "You are alive." He had seen her image before in intelligence briefings that smelled faintly of cheap coffee and fear. Tyrai of the Xirathi Dominion, a commander, a strategist. A woman whose name clung to the ruins of 3 human colonies like smoke that would not wash out. The files called her brilliant and cold. The rumors called her a ghost. "You came to finish it," he said. "No." She crossed the burnt deck with a practiced care, looking neither left nor right, only forward, a person who did not notice the dead because the dead were no longer part of the math. "I came because the council wants you taken into custody. You and any survivors. There is a treaty." He laughed, a harsh, dry sound that hurt his ribs. "Is that what this is, a treaty?" He gestured with a hand that shook toward the burning planet below. "You signed peace and then erased a town, erased a forest, erased a woman who laughed like water." Tyrai stood by the viewport, the orange of burning Lysara washing over her armor like moving paint. The colony contravened biosphere protocols, unauthorized terraforming. There are laws. There are excuses, Elias said. They stood in the broken bridge, 2 species and 1 silence. At last, Tyrai took something from her belt, a device the size of a coin, a dull, matte disc. Hold still. What is it? A control node. It will incapacitate you if you attempt violence or flight. This is procedural. You could just ask me not to run. Her eyes flicked to his. If the Xirathi had an expression for weariness, it touched her then. We have learned not to ask your kind for what you cannot give. He lifted his chin, and the device touched his chest. A cold kiss through torn fabric. It dissolved a second later, and he felt it like a weight somewhere behind his sternum. He wondered if he would ever forget it was there. Come, she said and turned. He followed because there was nothing else left to do but die, and he decided not to do that yet. The Dominion shuttle was a quiet swallow of a ship. Its skin rippled with embedded systems and smart armor that looked like flowing water pinned into a curve. Tyrai sat opposite him, hands on her knees, posture precise. War had taught Elias to read bodies, her body said, motionless, not relaxed, still not calm. Outside, Lysara rolled beneath them like a coal blown upon by a cruel breath. You watched it burn, he said. I watch everything I am sent to watch. You didn't stop it. She considered this without flinching. We cannot reverse a council directive after it is enacted. To attempt it is to shatter command cohesion. You shattered a city. The city stands in violation of, not anymore. Silence again. The skin of the shuttle flickered faintly with the light of debris burning in upper atmosphere. It was almost pretty. After a time, he asked, do you sleep? No, ever. We enter maintenance states, but not sleep as you understand it. Your REM cycles. The translator hunted a word and chose one that felt clinical in his ears. Inefficient. It's dreaming, he said. It's training for being alive. Tyrai looked at him, the long, slow turn of her head not dramatic, simply deliberate. You are alive because your body refused to stop, not because of a dream. Maybe, he said, but I keep going because of a dream. What did you dream when your world burned? She laughed, he said, and saw Clara's mouth curve before the memory broke. And I heard wind in a field, and a child learning the names of insects, and the creek where she dropped a stone to make a wish. Ordinary things, the reasons you don't let go. Tyrai did not answer. Her crest dimmed a fraction, then brightened like a thought spent and replaced. They docked with her flagship, a long, sun-darkened wedge that made soundless commands to the space around it. Elias expected a row of armored guards with sonic rifles, a parade of the efficient and the ferric. What he found instead was a corridor wide as a river, walls that flowed like polished ice, gentle light that had no visible source and made no shadow harsh. The Xirathi aesthetic was the opposite of human. We liked corners because corners felt like choices. They liked curves because curves were choices already smoothed down. In a containment suite that felt like a museum display. Bed, water, exercise frame, one window at an impossible angle to stars. Tyrai came to him again, not with soldiers but with a small plate of fruit. The fruit was pale green, crescents of translucent flesh that held a perfume of salt and spring. He didn't take it. We do not poison, she said. Good to know, he said and picked up a piece. It burst softly between his teeth, tasting like rain. He hated that he liked it. You survived 6 campaigns, Tyrai said when he had eaten 2 pieces and set the rest aside. You were decorated for the defense of Ganymede grain exchange. You led an orbital drop on Vassos 3. You refused to abandon a damaged carrier at Delta Rhi and were court-martialed and then pardoned. Your file is both illogical and persistently consistent. You've memorized it. I do not forget data I am given. You read the part where I married a botanist and promised her a life of quiet because all the loud parts were finally over. Tyrai's eyes held his. Yes. He looked down at his hands until they blurred, then up at the one window and the cold litter of space beyond it. You said the council wants me reassigned. To what? She studied him in a way that wasn't predatory. It felt more like listening with her eyes. We need a liaison to human enclaves, someone who can tell your people that resistance is a dead branch. There will be incentives. Incentives, he said. Say the quiet part. There is a list, she said. You may choose a companion. He stared at her. There was no heat in his voice, just a very quiet astonishment that exhausted itself by saying things in an ordinary tone. You're offering me a woman. A Xirathi female assigned to you. You will be treated with status. You will not be alone. Most of your kind degrade quickly without bonds. The translator slurred delicately around the last word as if embarrassed on her behalf. He stood. He moved closer with that careful, unhurried gait of someone who refuses to be shoved into the tempo of the person in front of them. He stopped within touching distance, though he did not touch. You said I could choose any woman I wanted. Yes, I want you. Tyrai did not step back. She did not step forward. Her crest dimmed very slightly, a star half eclipsed. That is unwise. Why? Because I am not a bond meant to comfort you. I am the instrument that ended lives like your wife's. I am a blade, Elias Ward. He said her name softly for the first time. Tyrai. Her throat worked. The translator softened the consonants. Yes, maybe I want the person who stood on the bridge of my dying ship and didn't lie to me. Maybe I want the one who knows exactly what a blade can do and chooses something else. Do not make mythology out of me, she said. A hint of something like warning edged the words, but not contempt. You will cut your hands. I've held worse. They stood there long enough for the light to change a shade so subtle no human would see it, but Elias felt it on his skin. The ship felt alive underfoot, a deep-bellied purr. Tyrai turned her head and let breath go slowly. Your species are reckless, because we care, because you do not calculate the cost before you jump. We calculate, we just jump anyway. Her eyes met his again. It was not surrender. It was not agreement. It was the mark of a person noting a point on a chart and circling it. We will speak again, she said, and left. Days bled into weeks. The Xirathi did not interrogate him. There were no bright lights, no pain machines, no threats. He realized with a disbelieving anger that had nowhere to land that they did not need to interrogate. The Dominion had perfected the art of learning in the absence of fear, monitoring micro-fluctuations in blood flow as he read files, tracking the flex of certain muscles when particular images were shown. To a Xirathi, a confession was a crude instrument when a body's chemistry would give up everything without a word. He began to practice stillness. He practiced thinking of rain and empty rooms and the creak of an old dock at night. He imagined snow falling on a lake, each flake a slow note from an instrument he had never heard played. Tyrai visited. She asked questions that were soft and small. What did your wife plant first? Do your people read books or are stories sung? Why do you name rivers? He gave answers you could carry with one hand. Wheat. Both. Because the river has to be called something other than hunger. Once, the ship shifted to a long burn to change orbit, and the view in his angled window dragged a star across the glass like a silver nail. Tyrai stood there and watched the nail make a line. We erase circles, she said, not as an order but an observation. We prefer flows that do not return to their beginnings. That's how you lose yourself, he said, by never letting a path lead you home. Home is where the council assigns us to build stability. Home is where the bench remembers your weight. She turned at that, head inclined. Do your benches remember? Ours did, he said, before the fire. He heard whispers in the corridors outside his world, a technician telling another in the language of cold rivers that the council was impatient, a logistics officer discussing the reallocation of fuel to a task force named for a sound he could not replicate. And then one night the ship's tempo changed the way a heartbeat changes for a runner, more blood, more push. When Tyrai came, there were no fruit crescents in her hand, only a stillness so deliberate it must have been hiding something that wanted to move. "There is a cluster of your species," she said. "They call themselves the Last Light. They are making ready." "For what?" "To prove that a candle cannot burn in a hurricane," she said. The translator had borrowed a human metaphor and bent it into a Dominion way of making truth tidy. "Where?" She told him the name of a moon Taurus, a mining world chewed to a ring around a pale planet. "Let me send a message," Elias said. "Let me tell them to run. I cannot allow that. You're going to kill them." Her crest flickered. "I will carry out the will of the council." "And what do you want?" She did not answer. Or perhaps the silence was an answer that admitted more than words could safely carry. He put both hands on the back of the chair and leaned into the ache in his arms, anchoring himself in pain because anger made you stupid and he could not afford to be stupid. "You know what will happen if you bring your fleets to that ring." "I know the projection." "Projections are cowards that don't want to meet the messy thing the future is," he said, surprised by the heat in his voice. "People with grief in their lungs do not fight the way your math says they will." "I do not underestimate your kind," Tyrai said quietly. "That is why I fear this." "Then help me stop it." "I cannot betray. You can choose." "A Xirathi does not choose against the council." "Then you are not a Xirathi," he said, and the words landed between them like a dropped tool that made a noise everyone in the room heard and could not pretend they hadn't. "You are Tyrai." Her gaze held his so long a person could have walked between them, carrying a basin of water without spilling a drop. Then she said, "The control node in your chest is linked to a range of the ship's interior. If you leave that range, it will compel you to sleep." "Compel me," he said, and made himself smile. She stepped closer then, close enough for him to see the smallest details of her. The faint scarring along the jaw that said a blade once passed there and didn't quite finish the job. The subtle patterning of skin like bark seen at twilight. Her voice lowered. "If I change the ship's map, the range moves. And if it were to move in such a way," he said just as soft, "that included a hangar bay. That would be an error easily corrected." Would it be corrected before or after a single stealth craft detached and fell into the dark like a leaf? She was so still it was like standing next to a partnered shadow. If such an error occurred, the council would punish the officer who allowed it. Then someone should be careful. She looked at him for one more long breath, and in that breath some metal shifted inside her. He felt it in the air like the way a room feels different when a storm changes its mind. "Be in the corridor at the next sleep cycle," she said. "Walk without stopping. Do not look back. Do not look as if you are moving toward anything other than a place you are permitted to be." She turned. "If you look back, I will arrest you. Would you?" "Yes." She did not let him take comfort there. "Go." He went. He did not look back. His heart tried to leave his body by every available exit. He kept it inside by promising it a field and a sky and a bench that remembered. The corridor unrolled ahead of him like ribbon. The lights did not change. The guards who should have been there were not. The door to the hangar opened the way a mouth opens just before a person changes their life with a single sentence. There were 2 craft in the hangar. One was a Delta Cloak scout with a skin that rippled like ink. The other was a maintenance drone big enough to carry a freight cube. He took the scout. It accepted his hands like a wary animal that has decided pain is likely but not certain. The rails hummed under him. He did not breathe as the hangar mouth slid apart. And then space took him in like cold water. Tyrai's voice did not come through his comms. She did not say good luck. She did not ask forgiveness. She did not make this clean with a ritual. She simply did what she did and let it become part of both of them. He carried that silence with him the way soldiers carry small things. A coin, a button, a strip of fabric that smells like the person you will never see again. Taurus was a ring of cliff and ice. The last light had hollowed out arteries in the rock and hung ships along them like fruit in a storm cellar. He came in dark and slow, a shadow in a shadow, and when Admiral Saren's voice flooded his channel, rough, incredulous, relieved, it was like a road he had not known still existed laying itself out under his feet. "Ward," Saren said, "you're supposed to be dead." "Working on it," Elias said. "Permission to dock." "Permission granted if you can tell me something only Elias Ward would know. You cried when the Ganymede exchange collapsed and told me it was smoke." A long pause. "Dock Bay 3, you idiot." The last light smelled like welding and recycled air, and the particular sharp sweat of people who used their bodies and didn't always remember to eat. Kids with buzzed hair ran past holding a drone wing between them. A woman sat cross-legged with a wire spool in her lap, singing under her breath while her hands braided copper like hair. A doctor with lined eyes stitched a gash on a Marine's thigh, while the Marine read aloud to a child from a book about a cat that rode a rocket. Elias wanted to lie down somewhere for 13 days and listen. Instead, he told them everything, but not in the voice of the accused. He used the voice you use to tell people how to live another week. He told them about the Dominion formations, about the way Tyrai's ships deployed their stunners before the beam cannons, about the rhythm in which they like to fire their EMP pulses. He told them about relay nodes hidden in sensor flares and about how Dominion ships calculated the arcs of human desperation and expected us to go there. "And if we don't go where we're expected?" Saren asked. "Then they must recalculate," Elias said, "and recalculating slows murder." He slept 4 hours, dreamed of Clara rinsing a cup and setting it to dry upside down on the sill and of Tyrai standing in a doorway and not saying his name. When he woke, the bass hummed the special hum of a place tuning itself for the kind of dance where some people don't come home. They fought 3 days later. The Dominion arrived like weather with intent. Their ships slid from a fold in space with the soundless prestige of predators that have never needed to hide. Tyrai's flagship led them, prow steady, the long flare of its engines a cool white that said, "We have calculated this moment and it ends in quiet." The solstice, which was a dreadnought if you were generous and a miracle if you were honest, hung above the ring. Its armor plates didn't match. Its starboard railgun had a dent the size of a van. The human fleet around it was a census of stubbornness. Gunboats built out of old ore haulers, corvettes with scars like a map, fighters painted with names in a dozen languages and symbols that meant "don't touch what you can't kill." Elias stood on the Solstice's bridge with Admiral Saren and Chief Gunnery Mate Anya Patel and a boy named Mika who had built a fire control interface out of gaming consoles. The Solstice's screens showed the Dominion vector lines like wires strung through a room. The math said they would cut us. The math always says that. The math is not wrong. It is incomplete. "Patch me to their flagship," Elias said. Saren's eyebrows lifted. "They don't answer us." "They'll answer me." The line opened. When Tyrai's voice came, it was not the voice of a lover or an ally. It was the voice of a person standing where her species had put her and looking out a window at a thing she had helped build and deciding where to stand inside her own bones. "Captain Ward," she said, "you are outnumbered." "I've been outnumbered since I was born," he said. "You can call me Elias. Not here. They'll break us if you let them," he said, "but they will bleed for it, and even if you do not sleep, you will lie still later and feel every name." There was a breath of silence. "Are you asking me to betray my command again?" "I'm asking you to tell me what your hands know," he said, as simple as he could say the truest thing in the room. "You know where the Dominion hides its eyes. You know what line to draw so your people cannot see what they are doing. You know where the first cut goes to make the rest fail to follow. You speak like a person who is not afraid to die." "I am terrified," he said, "and I am busy." "You are unacceptable," she said, and cut the line. The battle began like a thunderhead resolving itself into rain. Dominion stunner fields rolled over the human lines. Engines sputtered, flickered, then roared back to life as jury-rigged Faraday nests shrugged off the worst of it. The beam cannons fired, long knives of light that made metal remember it was once ore, and ore remember it was once dust. The solstice took the first hit on her belly. Alarms wailed and died and came back drunk. Anya screamed orders with the kind of beautiful profanity that makes a crew work harder because they want to hear what she'll say next. Mika's fingers moved in a blur. Saren stood like a tree in wind he trusted to pass. Railgun 3, Elias said, "Don't track their lead ship, track the shadow of its lead ship." "The what now?" Mika blurted. "The space right in front of it 4 seconds from now," Elias said. "It's where every Dominion captain puts their mouth when they speak the order to turn. They place ships the way their language places verbs." Anya stared at him a half second and then grinned like a wolf. "You heard the man. Shoot the sentence." The railgun spat. The slug was an old city bus with a loss of self-esteem. It met the edge of Tyrai's forward stunner field at a slant and skidded sideways into a sensor hood the size of a house. Something inside the Dominion flagship blew in a lightless way that only vacuum provides. And then miracle, accident, betrayal, choice. The Dominion line hesitated not in panic but in the pause of an orchestra that suddenly cannot hear the conductor. On Tyrai's bridge, a junior officer shouted, "We've lost primary target acquisition. Switch to secondary. Secondary is tied through, Commander." In the shiver between orders, Tyrai moved. Her hand made a pattern in the air. The pattern carried in the flagship's blood like a signal that had been waiting for this exact heartbeat. Across one vector, Dominion cannons dropped to diagnostic. Across another, a particular cascade began, technical and invisible, flipping a string of subroutines that rerouted commands meant to kill into loops that spun like children until they wore themselves out. She did it with elegance and speed you can only possess when you have abandoned certainty. Her second, a male with a crest like broken glass, saw the shape of what she had done and stepped toward her with a hand going for his sidearm. Tyrai's blade was in her palm before his fingers closed on cold metal. It touched the notch below his throat the way a jeweler touches a chain. He stopped in the only way that keeps you alive when a person like Tyrai asks it. "Commander," he whispered. The council is not in this room," she said. "Hold your position. But this is not a vote." Outside, the pause along the Dominion line widened into a possibility. Human ships punched through that chance like fists through paper. The solstices cannoned through a ragged spool of light into a cruiser's flank and found a seam. A fighter wing called the Stubborn 30 cut engines and skimmed under a destroyer's belly like fish deciding a shark belongs above them and not here. A gunboat named Clara's Wish rammed a sensor buoy and exploded into a cloud of reflective chaff that blinded enough eyes to give a refugee shuttle 30 seconds and a future. The sky felt like breaking bone. The sky felt like singing. War is like that, ugly and holy by turns, and sometimes in the same breath. Elias found the rhythm he always found in fights that mattered. A drum that lived at the hinge of his jaw and beat messages to the parts of him that needed to move. He spoke, and people moved at the edge of their fear without falling off. He listened, and the ship told him what hurt and what she could forgive. He thought of Tyrai's hand pattern, and of the moment when she decided that obedience was the dullest courage and chose the sharper kind. Then the solstice took a beam full on. The bridge tilted in a way floors should not. Mika went down, head bloody. The starboard weapons array went dark and the ship's forward momentum turned to a slide. Alarms learned new voices. Anya's mouth formed a word Elias did not hear. He understood anyway and braced. "Brace," Saren said a half second later, because old soldiers say the words even when they're not strictly necessary. They did not die. They practiced it. Then they stopped practicing it. Elias ran on a leg that didn't quite listen. He made it to engineering and found people covered in the powder of exploded insulation, eyes bright in ghost faces, hands moving in the choreographed frenzy of people who believe in the marrow. that the difference between life and death is frequently a bolt. Bleed the forward capacitors into the coil banks, he said. We'll pop the rails without ammunition. Give me a field that makes sensors think there's a mine. You want to scare them, said a girl improbably named Sunshine, teeth white in her soot. I can scare them. She did. The solstice vomited a lie into space. Dominion ships flinched. That flinch cost them more than metal. It cost them time, and time was the one element humans had always been alchemists of. Tyrai's flagship is venting from her auxiliary bays. Anya shouted over the comms, opening in her underbelly like an invitation. Take it, Saren said. Board them. Anya demanded. With what? Everything not nailed down. Elias was already moving. He grabbed a pulse rifle that had belonged to a man named Corwin who now lived only in the memory of his lover's hands. He boarded a shuttle with 10 others, none of them people you would mistake for heroes in a bar. All of them exactly what you need when a corridor smells like insulation, fire, and blood. The shuttle slammed into the wound under Tyrai's ship like a bandage. The hatch blew. The Dominion hallway beyond was smoke and white sparks falling like indifferent snow. Go, Elias said. They went. The Dominion fought like water moves through rock, patient, erosive, relentless. Humans fought like fire does with wind. Both are natural. Only one tastes like grief when you breathe it. They made the bridge with a cost Elias could count in first names, and he would. The doors opened. Tyrai stood like someone standing in the exact center of a room, because every other position you can take is a lie you don't want to tell. The second with the broken glass crest had a weapon drawn now. Tyrai's blade lay on the console, tip trickling something clear and sticky that might have been coolant or blood. The officers at their stations wore the faces of people who have not yet decided if you are still their commander. Elias didn't raise his rifle. He let it hang in his right hand. He stepped forward until he could speak without a comm. Hi, he said. Hello, she said. Every person in both crews existed in the space between those words, in that one precise vibration where an entire war paused its breath. Tyrai's eyes flicked over the humans, Anya with a cut across her cheekbone, Sunshine with her mouth set, ready to spit and laugh or cry as ordered. Elias burnt and steady. Then Tyrai looked at her own people, the officer whose hand trembled above a control, the second who could not decide whether to shoot in law's name or keep his gun in respects. She saw the map of this room's choices and found the path only she could walk. She lifted her hand slowly and pressed a sequence that had waited under her skin for years without ever being used for this. Across the Dominion fleet, weapons slid from kill to hold. Sensors blinked and entered a maintenance cycle that would take them out of the fight for 90 seconds. In a battle like this, 90 seconds is the difference between a sentence and a prayer. Her second gasped with a sound Elias had never heard from a Xirathi, a sound wild enough to make humans think of wolves. Commander, you can't. Tyrai looked at him and said very gently, I am. The second fired. He was quicker than regret. The shot took Tyrai in the side, painting the console with a delicate splatter like a field of white flowers. Elias moved without choosing to move, a kind of body honesty that happens in moments like this. He shot the second in the thigh. The man dropped, weapon clattering. Anya's boot removed the weapon from relevance. Hold, Tyrai said, voice thin but iron. No retaliation. Her officers froze. It was not loyalty to the council that held them. It was something else that had waited a long time for a name. Elias stepped to her. He could not read Xirathi wounds, but he could read the gray around her mouth. He pressed a sealant patch into the rent in her armor. It hissed around the edges like something afraid. You picked a dramatic time to be on my bridge, she said. I've always had bad timing, he said, and very good luck. You smell like smoke, she said. We always do. She tried to laugh. It became a wince. Your people will not forgive me. "They don't need to," he said, and heard his voice break around how much he wished they would. "I needed to." The 90 seconds Tyrai bought became a lifespan. Human ships poured into that window like water seeking every crack. Some died in the passage and made the passage possible. Others punched through and lived to count the ships that fell away behind them and wonder how to carry those numbers without walking wrong. The Dominion line bent. It did not break so much as find a new shape. The Council sent orders that lost their teeth when they passed through the network Tyrai had quieted. By the time the system came back online, the battle had changed its grammar. After the Dominion did not surrender, they retreated. The last light did not declare victory, they endured. That is the thing humans do that most species find both maddening and contagious. We keep going, and when going is impossible, we remake what possible means. They got Tyrai to a med bay as bright and clean as anything built out of scrap can be. Human surgeons learned Xirathi anatomy by the most ancient method. Carefully. She lived because she is the sort of person who does. She woke to the sound of water running somewhere, to a shape in a chair that was not a threat. Elias sat with a book open and his finger holding a page he had not read. Her crest pulsed softly, a tide against bone. He leaned forward. "Welcome back," he said. "You do this when your people are in med," she murmured, translator smoothing edges. "Sit by the bed like a guard that never steps forward." "Like a bench," he said, and smiled when she blinked, remembering. "We stay until the weight returns so the wood remembers the shape." She took a careful breath. Apparatus hissed its music. "The Council will come for me," she said, no drama in it, only weather. "They will come for you because of me." "We will be somewhere else," he said. "Where?" "An old cold place," he said. "A moon that was a mine that became a circle and then a home, or a ship that used to be parts and is now itself, or a planet that burned and is stubborn about green." Her eyes darkened like a sea before rain. "You're Lysara." "Our Lysara," he said. "If you want it, you still choose me." There was nothing coy in it, only the honesty of someone baffled by the idea that a person might not recalculate in light of a new wound. He nodded once, a movement as small and solid as a promise. "Yes." Saren said yes too in his way, by grunting when officers frowned and saying, "If a woman was brave enough to get shot on purpose so you could live, you can live in the same sky." Anya brought Tyrai soup that smelled like garlic and told her dirty jokes too fast for the translator, making Tyrai tilt her head like a curious hawk. Kids called her Captain Shiny, and then got embarrassed and then laughed and then leaned in to touch her armor when she said they could. There were stares. There were mutters that died when Elias walked into a room and stood with her. A person can use up a life on hate, or a person can spend it on the longer thing. When she could stand, he took her to a bay where an orchard would be. The last light had found seeds in a wrecked research ship and a way to coax soil from rock that rabbits would have approved of. Grow lamps hung like moons. On a table, someone had carved initials into soft pine, proof that there was time enough to be foolish on purpose. Tyrai touched the soil. "It is warm," she said, surprise tendering the words. "We put our hands in it," he said, "and it gives us back some steadiness." "Does it work?" "Not always right away." She lifted her fingers to her face and looked at the dark crescents of earth there as if reading a new language. "They built a place you could mistake for fragile if you looked quickly, which is to say a place as strong as any wall made of steel. They built it with shared kitchens and sleeping bays, and a small round room with cushions where people said names out loud when the names hurt to carry in silence. They built it with workshops where the air smelled of copper and burnt sugar, and where a girl named Sunshine taught Tyrai to solder by saying things like, "Make the metal think it always wanted to be a seam." Tyrai built a small knife for herself there, with a handle wrapped in cloth from a human shirt, and she did not carry it like a threat but like a memory with edges. They planted wheat and beans and something with blue flowers that smelled sharp and sweet and made the air in the orchard bay feel like an apology accepted. Tyrai knelt and pressed a seed into soil and covered it very carefully with her long fingers. "What do you call this?" she asked. "Vetch," Elias said. "We plant it to give the soil back what the soil gave us." "It is a circle." "It is," he said, and watched her crest pulse brighter. He told her about Clara at the river. Tyrai told him about her training at an academy where you learn to strip your face of story and let your mind be obedient. He told her about a fossil he found when he was 8 and how he slept with it under his pillow until his mother said the dream was starting to make him rude. She told him about the first time she saw snow when a scout craft skimmed a polar cap, and how the sensation of thinking it was all white, and then seeing it was every shade was uncomfortable and exquisite. People came to accept her not because of speeches, but because of mornings. Because she stood in line and carried crates and learned to fix a stubborn pump, and asked toddlers solemn questions about what pretend looks like. Because she was there when a bulkhead ruptured and she sealed it with the neat quickness of someone born to seal. And then she stood by the person who got knocked down by the blast and held their hand until their breath stopped racing. Because she never made a display of apology, she made a practice of presence. The council did come, once in whispers, twice in scouts that did not return, and then in a delegation that arrived with their armor polished and their crests stiff with intent. They asked for Tyrai like she was a misplaced tool that needed to be returned to the box. She stood in front of them with Elias and Saren and a dozen others at her back. The council envoy recited law. Tyrai replied with history. The envoy threatened and smiled and did that thing polished people do with their voices when they want to call a cage a room with amenities. "There is a bench," Elias said when it was his turn. "It remembers her weight now." He said nothing else. It was enough. Or it wasn't. Either way, the council left that day without Tyrai because they thought time would do the workforce could not. And then the war burned the remaining fuel of their certainty, and they had other fires to tend. Years are like wires. If you are not careful, you trip. They tripped sometimes on old anger and on the pain of a world they could see even when it wasn't there, and on the names in the round room that accumulated like snow you cannot stop with your hands. They got up. They planted again. The last light stopped being last in people's mouths. It became a place, not a goodbye. They returned to Lysara when the sky finally looked like weather and not a weapon. The land smelled like cooling iron. Trees stood where glass had been, their leaves small and brave. The river Clara had named for her grandmother made a sound like laughter in the shallows. Elias walked where their house had been and put his knees down in that place like a man at prayer. Tyrai stood back and let him be small. When he stood, he carried a stone the size of a hand. "May I?" she asked. He nodded. She set the stone in the dirt. They carved a name into it together, the knife from the workshop cut slowly, patiently, as if remembering cloth. They did not write beloved or sorrow. They wrote only she planted because that was the beginning that did not end. There were other fights. There is always tomorrow's trouble. The Dominion learned to say the word reform and then learned to make it mean something. Not everywhere, not enough, but some. Tyrai was named traitor in some mouths and hero in others. She learned not to walk to either word and kneel. She worked. She slept sometimes, she told Elias with a hint of wonder, not the Xirathi maintenance state, but something else she was shy to call by your word. She dreamed a dream once and told him there was snow in it, and that the snow was not white at all. They had seasons on the ring and called them for what they were, not by old names that belonged somewhere else. Planting, fixing, grieving, mending, laughing. He grew older. So did she, but in a Xirathi way that wore its time differently, as if her body had decided to bargain with years and find a sweeter rate. There were nights when the power dipped, and the lamps went gold, and the orchard was full of long shadows that made it easy to think of ghosts. They did not drive the ghosts out. They made room. He would lie with his head in her lap, and she would touch his hair like she was learning a prayer, and he would talk about little things on purpose. The taste of a certain stew, the way a child's feet sounded in the corridor, the click the water maker made just before it was ready. She would tell him about starlight on hulls at different angles, about the geometry of a formation so elegant it still made her skin hum with the part of her that would always be a soldier, about the shape of a choice when it sits in your chest before you take it into your hand. In time, historians came, those quiet plunderers. They asked questions and wrote books and gave lectures where the lighting was always a little too dramatic. They took the story of a man who said, "I want you," and a woman who said, "That is unwise," and made it a narrative with arcs that looked like neat bridges across messy rivers. Elias did not attend those lectures. Tyrai did once and came home with an expression like a door cracked in a wind that didn't belong to your house. He made her tea. She drank it and let the house learn her breath again. "What did they get wrong?" he asked. "They wanted me to be a symbol," she said, looking at the far wall where the light made a triangle. "Symbols do not need benches." He smiled then, soft and proud. "No," he said, "just people." There was a day when a ship arrived unannounced at Taurus. It came limping, spine bent. On board were Xirathi refugees who had decided that you can love a culture and still decide to leave a government. The difference between those two loves is something you feel in your body like a crack healing. When they stepped off the ramp, one of them, her crest dull with fear and hunger, saw Tyrai and went to her knees as if the floor had reached up and asked. Tyrai bent, lifted her, and said something in a language the translator gave up on. The woman laughed and cried at once. The sound came into the room and shivered everybody's skin. A generation grew up that did not know what it was to see a planet burn. They knew how to weld. They knew how to plant. They knew a dozen words for the exact color of light on the ring at a certain hour. They knew that the person cooking stew might have bones that look human and a crest that glows when she sings. They knew that different does not mean dangerous until it does, and that when it does there are tools for that. They learned history as the names of choices ordinary people made when nobody was watching. They learned to say thank you. In 6 tongues without thinking language is a cage. They played under benches that remembered them. There was no happily ever after. There was only ever after, which is a different and better thing. It is stew nights and fixed days and the mornings when you do not want to get up and you do anyway because the pump will not mend itself, and because a child is waiting for you to show them how to solder without burning their fingers. It is remembering names out loud. It is making a place where when you leave, you know what door to come back through. When Elias's hair went white not like surrender but like light on water, he took Tyrai back to Lysara to see the forest he had promised the dirt. The trees were tall enough to earn the name now. Birds made a sound he had almost forgotten how to hear. They walked under leaves that flickered silver side out when the wind turned sly. At the river, he stopped and placed his palm on a stone that was smooth because time had argued with it long and kindly. "This is us," he said. "A rock," Tyrai said, "a rare tease. A thing made patient by being touched," he said. She looked at him a long time, and the black of her eyes held a galaxy he had slept under and woke to and would sleep beside until sleep changed into something else. "Yes," she said, "that is accurate." They sat on a bench he had built from a fallen branch polished until you could see your better self in it. It remembered them when they sat. He could tell by the way it did not complain beneath their weight. He told her, unexpectedly and without planning it, about the first time he saw her. The bridge orange with fire, her shape a cutout in smoke. He told her how he thought he would hate her grayly and forever. He told her that some hates are a form of hunger, and if you feed them, they demand more. Better to give them nothing and let them eat their own tails. He told her about Clara's laugh one more time, because saying it out loud kept it from becoming brittle. Tyrai listened with the intense stillness he had learned is not emptiness. It is attention. It is love in a language that does not use that word yet. She put her hand on his hand and the bench made a soft sound that was only wood but also more. "We did not conquer," she said. "No," he said. We built a place worth defending, and sometimes we defended it. If your historians ask you for a line to end the story, she said, with a glint in her eye that no translator gave her, what will you give them? He looked out at the river and at the field and at the light that belonged to this hour and no other. He thought of blades repurposed into knives that cut bread, and of the babies born on a ring inside a broken moon to parents who taught them to name stars not by conquest but by conversation, and of a woman whose crest glowed faintly when she read to children from a book about a cat who rode a rocket and made everyone in the room a little braver about being ridiculous. He tightened his fingers on hers and felt the quick, strong answer of her hand. "I'll give them the truth," he said, and his voice was as sure as rain knows where to fall. And that day the galaxy learned, humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.